Mute myself. All right, excellent. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that small delay. We were just getting a couple technical things figured out and wanted to give everybody a chance to join. But I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll just make sure here. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining Resource Central's Waterwise Landscape webinar, Creating a Colorful Colorado Yard by Allison O'Connor. My name is Melanie Stolp, and I'm the Water Programs Manager with Resource Central. I manage both the Slow the Flow and the Garden in a Box programs, which are two of just many programs that we offer. And Resource Central is a local nonprofit that has been around since 1976. We offer a very wide range of conservation programs in three main programmatic areas, one of which is water conservation. And our mission as an organization is to put conservation into action. So we do this by partnering with local water providers, such as the City of Longmont, with whom we're partnering to put on this webinar as part of our Waterwise Landscape Seminar Series. It also offers residents a variety of programs, and I'm going to let a representative from the City of Longmont go into a little bit more detail on that. But if you have any questions about the programs available to you as either a City of Longmont resident or any other city, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll provide contact information in this webinar. So just to get started, as you can see, we're figuring out a few final technical logistics here, but I just want to go over the format of this webinar in terms of answering questions and the format for a presentation. So if you do have any technical questions throughout the presentation, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which will appear if you hover over the Q&A or hover over the bottom, you should see that. And you can just ask questions through that. And there's almost 200 expected attendees on this webinar, so I'll definitely do my best to manage all the questions asked as they come in. So in an effort to keep this presentation engaging for everybody, even though we're not together in person, we will definitely be taking questions related to the content of this seminar. So please feel free to send in any questions you have via the same Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as they come up. We've worked in a few breaks throughout this presentation where I'll pose these questions that you've sent in and ask them to our speaker, Allison. So thank you so much for your understanding as we work through these questions. I'll do my best to get to as many as we can. And I'll be looking out for questions that really pertain to the whole group to answer during the question breaks. But if at any point, if your question was unanswered this evening about this webinar or really any other topic that's related, definitely feel free to email us. We will provide the email in the chat here, but the email is turfremoval@resourcecentral.org, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Additionally, if you like this webinar and any others in our series this year, we'd love for you to leave us a review on Google. And as an attendee tonight to both this webinar and any of the other webinars, you are automatically entered into a weekly raffle to win $25 off a Garden in a Box coupon. They're currently sold out, but they will absolutely be back in later in the year and you could redeem that. And winners will be announced at the end of the week and emailed. So definitely stay tuned and check your email. So finally, this webinar is offered in both English and Spanish. And so you should have been asked to join the room of your preference. But if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and select the room that you wish to participate. So para activar la interpretación, por favor, vaya a la parte inferior de su pantalla y haga clic sobre el icono del globo y seleccione el idioma español. Gracias. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Well, actually, sorry, I'll actually let Francie from the City of Longmont go ahead and take it over from here. So I'd like to introduce now Francie.
Great, thank you, Melanie. My name's Francie Jaffe. I'm the Water Conservation and Sustainability Specialist for the City of Longmont. So we are helping to sponsor this evening, and I appreciate Resource Central's giving us the opportunity to just go over some programs that are available if you live within the City of Longmont. Go to the next slide, Allison. So besides working with Resource Central, which we partner with a number of programs, which I'll highlight a little bit more on the next slide, but we also work with Efficiency Works. If you live in Longmont or actually even Loveland, Fort Collins, or Estes Park, you're probably aware of Efficiency Works as an energy efficiency. As of last year, we started adding water rebates and water incentives, so you can go to one location for both energy and water efficiency. If you live in Boulder County, you also have access to Energy Smart, which is the Boulder County program. And if you receive natural gas from Xcel Energy, they also have a number of rebates that you can often combine. So there's the link on the bit.ly/water rebates if you would like more information. Next. I'd specifically want to highlight, as the weather's very nice today, as we get closer, maybe probably in another month, closer to June. If you have a sprinkler system, you may start turning it on. I highly recommend the free irrigation assessments with Resource Central. In Longmont, we offer them for residents, businesses, and HOAs. Once you have an assessment, you then can qualify for a number of irrigation rebates. So you can learn more at bit.ly/water rebates. That goes to the Longmont website that has more details. You can also go straight to the rebate application at ewrebates.com. If you're listening in Spanish, both of those, we have information available in Spanish on our website, but the rebate application is currently in English, but we have Spanish applications available at our office. So there's a number you can call to access that. Next. And then I just wanted to quickly highlight, we have a number of different other citywide programs. The first two listed are different assistance programs for those who are income qualified. We also have some neighborhood programs. So whether you want to actually sign up to be a volunteer and help your neighbors kind of do energy efficiency upgrades, or sign up to receive energy efficiency upgrades, that's the SOUL program. We also have a sustainable business program, and there are a number of different volunteer and events through Join Us, which is information that different things that our parks do. So there's a lot of other opportunities to get involved. So I'll just end on the next slide with my contact information. My email and the general phone number is listed. You could also learn more about the city sustainability program at the website. So thank you, and I will hand it back to Resource Central.
Awesome, thank you so much. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and dive into our webinar tonight, Creating a Colorful Colorado Yard with Allison O'Connor. So I would love to just go ahead and introduce our speaker tonight. Allison O'Connor is the Colorado State University Extension Horticulture Agent in Larimer County. She's been with the Extension for 15 years. Allison coordinates the Larimer County Master Gardener Program and assists homeowners and industry with horticultural questions. She attended Iowa State University and The Ohio State University, majoring in horticulture, and completed her PhD at Colorado State University in 2014. She studied nursery tree production and landscape establishment. In her spare time, she enjoys golfing, baking, and tending her backyard chickens. That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, Allison, and I'll let you go ahead and take over.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody. I am Allison, and I will be your speaker for the remainder of the evening. I'm really excited to share with you a lot of these plants and how you can really have colorful landscape solutions year-round, which is wonderful. I do want to do a plug for Extension. If you're not familiar with Extension, we're the branch of our land grant institution, which is Colorado State University. Land grants are available in all 50 states across the United States. And what we do is we really are taking that information, that research from the university, and bringing it back to you in our community. If you've ever been a 4-H'er or ever called the Master Gardeners, both of those are programs with Extension. But just know that we have lots of other resources available to you as well, such as financial management, canning or baking at higher altitude, agriculture, natural resources. And so if you haven't visited our website, I encourage you to go there. There's a plethora of information. We also joke that if you're suffering from insomnia, it's a good place to go because there's just so much available. So just know that you have a local county extension office no matter where you're tuning in from, and definitely use those as resources. Tonight, this is what we're going to cover. There's quite a bit, and I will say that it was difficult for me to pick the plants just because there are so many wonderful plants out there. So this is only a selection. These are not the only plants you can grow. So really think outside the box. Check with your local nurseries and garden centers. Check with the Plant Select program, which I'll talk to you about. And really think about what you want in your landscape and how you can also really be economical with that water use. And so we'll start it off with the basics of xeriscape, talk like one slide on design, and then the majority of the presentation will actually be talking plants. So you probably know if you've lived here for a while that we are in a semi-arid state. We don't get a lot of precipitation. We've had a little bit the last couple of weeks, which is really nice. And of course, we had that great snowfall that we had in March, but our trees didn't like it so much because they had a lot of damage. But just note, based on where you live in the state of Colorado, you might have 8 to 15 inches of precipitation. If you've moved here from another place, I am originally from Minnesota. Obviously, you may be used to more wet conditions. So moving to Colorado can be a change, and learning to garden with a lower amount of precipitation, with sunny days and low humidity can all pose different types of challenges. And of course, the secret's out. A lot of people are moving to Colorado, and as we get more increase in populations, it's going to put more stress on our water supply. So there's only so much water available, and so we need to make sure that we have enough for us as humans, and then also be able to have landscapes and places that we enjoy in our outdoor setting. And xeriscape, or sometimes I'll call it Waterwise gardening, can really reduce your water bill use by up to 60%. And we all know that water isn't cheap, and it might be getting more expensive in many places. And so that is a big thing where we can all be really stewards of the environment and have that available to us. What is interesting though, and this is where sometimes the information may not be as truthful as it actually is, but our landscapes, and this accounts for golf courses, this accounts for our parks areas, our backyards, our green spaces, all of that only uses about 3% of total water from Colorado. And we really do get a lot of return on investment from that 3%. Also know that a lot of the water that originates in Colorado leaves the state. And so it goes to other locations. We have those giant pipelines, and the history of Colorado water and where it goes and who owns it is really complicated. But just know that we only have about 40% that stays here. And of that 40%, about 3% is used for landscapes. Over the last 10 years, we as a population have done amazing work to really reduce our per capita water use, and we can continue to do better. So we have made huge strides by reducing our own water use, and we can continue to do that as well. So in the summer, 50% of a household budget could be used for landscaping. Obviously, turf gets a bad rap. I will defend turf because I often think that it's misused, but turf does have a place in our landscape. That's not tonight's topic. But just know that we can continue to reduce those numbers so that we can have sustainable landscapes that are very beautiful, but also have places that we can enjoy with our kids and our pets and everyone else in our families. So water is expensive, just do your part, save it as you're able, use efficient irrigation, put in the low flow toilets. All of those are going to add up over time, and that's what I would challenge you to do. And then obviously what we're talking about tonight is plant selection. So it may change the way you've gardened in other parts of the United States. So do your part, continue to save water. Really at the end of the day, using plants that are appropriate for our climate is going to save you money, which is a big thing. And I know that you might have some plants that you absolutely love from another location where you used to live, but there could be a good substitute. So do some homework, ask your local extension office, ask your master gardeners. They all have great ideas, and we all love to talk plants. I will encourage everybody to think about the right plant for the right place. That's the biggest thing, is that we really need to be thinking about what are the characteristics of the plant, how much water do they need, and then placing them appropriately. We also need to think about mature size and shape. So that is a really good design tip, that when we get things from the nursery, obviously they're really small. If you're participating in the Garden in a Box program, those little 2 and 4 inch pots are going to get much larger in the next 3 to 5 years. So right plant, right place is huge, along with making sure that you are designing appropriately, because we've all done it. We've planted something in the wrong spot, or maybe a tree too close to the house, and then we have to make amends and either do some interesting pruning or potentially have to move it. So really do think about that. And then also having a sustainable landscape also means that you're going to have reduced pesticide use, fertilizer use. And so that is another component of doing things appropriately, using water appropriately, and having a lot of those sustainable inputs that you don't need to have as much of. A term that you should become familiar with is called hydrozoning. What this really means is that you are grouping plants with like water needs together. So if you're looking at this picture, you might be in awe or disgust, hopefully maybe both. But this was a landscape that was actually installed in the Phoenix area, so not in Colorado, fortunately. But this is the worst offense of hydrozoning that I have ever seen in my life. So we have the saguaro cacti and yuccas planted in tall fescue turf. Tall fescue is a cool season grass, much like our Kentucky bluegrass, and obviously has a much different water need than the cacti and the yucca. So when this landscape was installed, it looked good for a while, but as you start to have to maintain this and water it, you're either going to be overwatering your cacti and succulents or underwatering the turf, and neither is going to be very happy. In this case, based on where it is in Phoenix, you would rip out the turf. It's not needed in this situation, and really focus on those cacti and succulents. But the same thing goes for your plants. Make sure that you do understand their water use, how they work together, and not planting something like vegetables next to a Waterwise perennial, because they're going to have different water needs. So let's talk plants. This is going to be the bulk of the presentation. And there are great plants that you can grow in Colorado that will give you year-round color, where you can enjoy your garden for all 4 seasons. So we're going to kick it off with spring, because that's where we're at right now. So let's talk about plants for spring color. And I will say that I'll take breaks after each season. And if you have questions, Melanie will let me know what those are. She may respond to some of them as well, but be sure to ask if you have any questions. So we'll start with perennials for spring. These are plants that are going to come back year after year. They're considered what we call herbaceous. And so they regrow from the crown of the plant. They don't have any sort of woody plant parts. The first is iris. Iris is really ubiquitous with Colorado. I would be hard pressed to find a garden that usually doesn't have iris in it. It's just such a common, hardy, tough plant, and it is one of our most reliable spring blooming plants. Of course, you're familiar with the purple iris that we have. I personally think they smell like grape jelly. So I have quite a few purple iris in my front yard, and I just love the smell because it reminds me of grape jelly. The 2 most common types of iris are the bearded and Siberian. Of those, the bearded iris, which is the one photographed on the right, is going to be the most drought tolerant. And I will say that once iris are established in your garden, they really need little to no water. They are very tough, very tolerant, and can do very well with just some spring rains, maybe occasional summer water. They do need full sun, and that tends to be the case with a lot of our Waterwise plants, is they do best in full sun, those really hot, dry conditions. The great thing about iris, they come in so many different colors, shapes. We have the petals, which are called the falls. Those are the ones that are kind of drooping downward. And the bearded iris are known because they actually have this little fuzzy caterpillar-like entrance where pollinators can actually access. The next plant is creeping phlox. Creeping phlox is one that really I call a one-hit wonder, but I think it does deserve attention in the garden. These are mat-like perennials, and they have really evergreen-like needles. And so after they're done blooming, they're not super interesting, but I will say that in the spring, they are phenomenal. They are completely covered in blooms, and you will get at least 4 weeks of blooms from them, if not longer. They are one that will do best in full sun, and they're also a great pollinator plant. So if you're looking to attract some of our pollinators in the early spring, creeping phlox is a really, really good choice. One that was introduced from the Plant Select program, and this is a program, it's a cooperative program with CSU, the Denver Botanic Garden, and also the Green Industries of Colorado. Those 3 organizations founded Plant Select, and it's a research program where they actually trial and research plants and then introduce them as good selections for the arid West. So that includes Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, maybe down into New Mexico, Northern Arizona. So these are plants that have been trialed and introduced. They're not necessarily native, although they do have some native plants in the introductions, but they are just plants that are reliable and good choices. The great thing is that the Plant Select website has so much great information. They have designs available if that's not your strong suit. They also have a plant finder tool. So if you're looking for a plant that would do well in a south-facing landscape with maybe, limited moisture, but you want it to attract pollinators, you could actually select those and get some options. So one of the plants that Plant Select introduced back in 2006 was a phlox called Snowmass. And there it is in full bloom. You can kind of see why it was named Snowmass. It's like your typical phlox. It's covered in white blooms, April to June. And I will say we're having a late spring, so I haven't seen too many phlox bloom, at least in my area. I'm up in Windsor in northern Colorado. Maybe in the Denver area, you've had some warmer weather, but we're still waiting on some of those bloomers. And this is one that can grow up to 8,000 feet. So if you do garden in a higher elevation, all the plants on Plant Select have their hardiness and also how high they can go in elevation. So it's just plantselect.org, and you can check that out. And I'll be actually referencing a number of Plant Select plants tonight. The next spring bloomer is Columbine. This is, of course, another very familiar one to us in Colorado. It's our state flower after all. And it's a great pollinator plant, attracting both birds and butterflies. The flowers come in many different colors. Sometimes the center of the flower can be different, so we call them bicolor, which just means they have 2 colors on the flower itself. Columbines are great because they grow really in any sort of sunlight. They can grow in part sun, full sun, all the way to partial shade. So I actually have them planted on the north side of my house. It only gets maybe a few hours of sun a day, and the columbines absolutely thrive. They are deer resistant, so if you deal with critters, Columbine is a great option. The one downside is that Columbine can self-seed. This may not be a bother to you. I find it to be more of a gentle seeding. It's not super obnoxious like some plants that we face, but just know that if you have Columbine and you let the flowers go to seed, you will have new Columbines coming up. More than likely though, they're going to be yellow flowered because Columbines do not breed true to type from seed. So if you really like the pink ones, just know that the seeds from those may turn yellow. A couple of introductions from the Plant Select program. The first is Denver Gold. This is a beautiful yellow golden columbine. It has all the same characteristics as the parent columbines. It was just introduced because it does have a really nice clear yellow flower. And then Remembrance, and this was introduced after the Columbine shootings. So this was introduced, and that you might see this on some license plates also in Colorado. This is also a Plant Select introduction, and it has that bicolor flower with the white center and the the purple sepals. So another beautiful plant. Columbine absolutely has a place in the garden, and it's nice again because it can do well in shady conditions. Let's move on to spring blooming bulbs. So don't forget your bulb friends. I love spring blooming bulbs just because I think they're actually very drought tolerant. And why they do so well is because they get those early spring rains. And so that tends to be when we get a lot of moisture, whether it's from rain or snow. So they are very reliable. I would encourage that if you're really looking for some early spring color to put some bulbs in your garden. Crocus are so tough, resistant to rabbits. They are really inexpensive. I mean, you're talking maybe a dime per bulb, but you can buy them in bulk and really get a better bang for your buck. Crocus are considered a minor bulb. What this means is that they tend to be smaller. So grouping them together in at least groups of 3 or 5 or even more is what's going to really make them stand out because they're shorter in stature, they're not very showy, and so you need a bunch of them in order to really make an impact. Once they're planted, you can water them in, and then you really don't need to water them again. The spring blooming bulbs are best planted in the fall, sometime in the window of September, October. That's when you'll see them in the garden centers. You can also do them online, and you would want to just get them in before maybe mid-October just to ensure that you have spring blooms. And the crocus come in all sorts of colors, white, yellow, purple streaks. They are just absolutely adorable. Here's just a couple. They do naturalize, and what that means is that they'll actually start to grow into larger clumps. So yellow mammoth is one here. It's obviously in a woodland situation, not here in Colorado, but they do naturalize. And they are one, if you have a buffalo grass lawn or a blue grama lawn, you could plant these into the lawn. They will bloom, they will be adorable, and then as they start to fade, your buffalo grass is going to start to green up. So they're a perfect companion for some of our warm season grasses. Another spring bloomer is the species tulips. Sometimes they're called wildflower tulips, and I know that High Country Gardens classifies them as such, so you might see them as wildflower tulips. Species tulips, they're a little different than our Dutch tulips just because they tend to be a little bit shorter. They have more strappy leaves. They're not as upright. And their flowers tend to be a little bit more open. But talk about impact. These species tulips are beautiful. I love anything with a blue color. It's amazing. They do tend to naturalize more. The true Dutch tulips, I would say they're not really reliable. You might get a couple years of bloom out of them, then they might take a break. I know when I moved into my house, I discovered there were tulips planted that didn't bloom for 5 years. And then I had red tulips in my front yard that I hadn't planted. So the Dutch tulips are not as reliable, but the species tulips really do bloom each spring. These are also great for rock gardens. So if you have a true rock garden or an area that you've converted to a rock area, the species tulip should have a home there. Here's just a couple cultivars that you could consider. The Persian Pearl is the one on the left with that really beautiful magenta color, the yellow throat, and then Little Princess is on the right, more of an orangey color. So you can really, diversify your landscape. You can pick the colors that you want, especially coming up in the spring and really make an impact. So consider the species tulips. And then the last spring bulb I have is Allium. I adore Allium. These are in the onion family. So you might be growing chives or some of those other plants, and Alliums can be ornamental. They can also be edible, of course, but we usually grow the Alliums as ornamentals. And they are deer and rabbit resistant. There's an incredible variation. So they have blooms as big as like a small beach ball, which are really impressive in the landscape. And then they have ones, this one is called ping pong, which is the size of a ping pong ball. So the diversity in the flowers is really interesting. And they have a really long period of bloom as well. So they have some early blooming ones, but then also ones that bloom well into June. And then after the flowers fade, they actually stay on the plant and can also serve as an ornamental interest. Great for pollinators. This is one that I see bees on all the time. And you can really go crazy with alliums and have a lot of diversity in your landscape. Here's just a few. Gladiator is kind of the common purple one that you might see. Star of Persia, that is an enormous bloom. That's like a beach ball size. And then you can see just the diversity in the flower texture as well. Here's pink, and then Mount Everest. And again, just check your heights, check the bloom times. You could have a sequence of alliums that bloom really for multiple weeks in the early spring. And again, very, very drought tolerant and very reliable bloomers as well. Moving into trees and shrubs, and then we'll take a break for questions if there are any. One of the best trees, I think, that has amazing blooms is the Russian hawthorn. Now, the Russian hawthorn doesn't have the good scent that our friends, the crab apples, do. Unfortunately, hawthorns are actually pollinated mostly by flies, and anything pollinated by a fly tends to have kind of a, let's just say an earthy scent. You might define it in other ways, but this is a great small ornamental tree. It's a little bit wider than it is tall, so it is a nice one if you have some smaller landscapes that you're looking to fill. And I would also say that Russian hawthorn really has multi-season appeal. This is one that has great blooms in the spring, really interesting fruit in the summer, and then it does get some fall color as well. So Russian hawthorn really checks a lot of boxes. The fruit also persists into the winter months, and so if you want to feed wildlife or birds, it is a good option. It's not a favorite of birds, but they'll eat it eventually. So think of it that way. There are some sparse thorns on it, and this is a tree that has great tolerance to drought, great tolerance to most soil conditions. Here's just a couple additional photos. I love that cherry red fruit. And so after it blooms, those plumes of white, it will fade into these cherry red blooms. And again, they are eaten by wildlife, not as desirable as crab apples, but they will get eaten. The other nice thing is that the foliage is a dark green color and really more of a cut leaf shape. So I think the leaves are actually really interesting too. So a nice tree. Here it is in the middle of summer. This is actually down at the Adams County Fairgrounds in Brighton. This is planted in their xeriscape beds. And you can see how it's absolutely covered in amazing cherry red fruit. So Russian hawthorn is definitely at the top of my list for a spring bloomer. The next one is sucker punch chokecherry. And before you turn your head away because I brought up a chokecherry, yes, chokecherry has a bad reputation as sometimes being a little bit weedy, as sometimes being a suckering tree because it gets all those suckers from the base, those root suckers that come up. But this is a newer introduction from the Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery up in North Fort Collins. And this is a non-suckering chokecherry. So hopefully that got your attention. This tree was actually growing on their property for years and years. And finally, someone noticed that it never had suckered, which is great. So this is a smaller ornamental tree, about 20 by 20. And the reason we grow chokecherries is because it has these amazing white blooms in the spring. Like they are long plumes of white blooms that attract pollinators. It has dark red foliage in the summer. And so that's actually a nice feature. The foliage comes out green and then turns into a reddish color. The flowers then fade into kind of a black fruit, which are then eaten by birds. And so you know, it's a great tree, really wildlife friendly. This is a very drought tolerant species as well. And it just really started coming on the market within the last couple of years. Availability is probably limited. So if this is one that you're really interested in, I would check with your local garden centers and nurseries to see if they have it in stock and then buy it as soon as you see it. One great shrub, of course, is the common lilac. And I was just looking at my lilacs over the weekend. Not much going on there. I think, again, in maybe other parts of the southern metro, you might have some further along growth than we do. But the common lilac is a great shrub. And this is what we call also the old-fashioned lilac. So these were shrubs that were usually planted along homesteads when people first started to settle in Colorado. And so we sometimes still see these in areas that are older in parts of Colorado. But lilac, the blooms really bring me back to childhood. We had a lilac on the side of our house growing up, and it's just an intoxicating smell. It smells so good, and it really is kind of an old-fashioned scent. The great thing about lilac, though, is that it is very tough, very reliable. I wouldn't go and call it xeric, but it can be drought tolerant. And so it does maybe need some water in periods of extreme drought, but for the most part, it's going to do really well. If you do need to prune your lilac, do it after the flowers bloom. So this is a plant that blooms on old wood. So it blooms on buds that are formed the previous summer. And if you do your annual pruning in the spring, you'll cut off all the flowers for that year. So it is best to wait and prune it after it flowers. And it does benefit from renewal or rejuvenation pruning. Both of those are essentially removing larger limbs that you can either cut it all the way to the ground, or you can remove a third of the largest over a period of 3 years and then have a younger shrub, because sometimes it gets leggy, it doesn't bloom as well. And so that is a good sign that you might need to do some rejuvenation pruning. And it can grow up to 8,000 feet. There are so many cultivars out there, we don't have time to discuss them, but just know that there are many different types. So Albert Holden is one out of Canada. Miss Kim is one of the Chinese lilacs. And so there's been a lot of introductions, a lot of cold hardiness in these plants, which is really, really good. Miss Kim is 5 to 6 feet tall. She's really cute. I have her in my landscape, and she's actually a later bloomer. So you can also time it. If you love lilacs and you want that longer season of bloom, you can time it where they might have a sequence of blooms over several weeks. Okay, I'll stop there. Melanie, are there any questions I can answer?
Awesome. Yeah, wow, those are some pretty beautiful plants. Now I want all of them. And just a reminder to everybody that the slides will be sent out afterward for some of those names, as well as the information about Plant Select. Yeah, we've definitely had a few questions. So I think I'll start. There are quite a few about the chokecherry. So first, what do you mean by non-suckering on the sucker punch chokecherry tree?
Oh, I should have explained that. So there are plants, and you might see this on your fruit trees. Maybe you see it on, I'm trying to think of others, like Hawthorn can sucker, that you get those growths that come up from the base, and they are distracting. They can actually interfere with overall plant growth, and they just don't look good because you get this massive different shoots coming up from the base. And so chokecherry is kind of a famous example of a plant that suckers. Sucker punch doesn't sucker, and that's a really big benefit for that tree.
Okay, cool. And so can you control the suckering at all, or is that control?
So if you have a plant that suckers, you absolutely should control it. And the easiest thing to do is really just prune them off. So make it part of your regular maintenance every month. I think that's a good thing to do. Then you can just go in and clip those back to the base or as close to the soil line as you can get.
Awesome. Okay, that was very helpful. Okay, and just a quick question here, is the Iris germanica the same as bearded iris?
That's the German iris, I believe, and I don't know the parentage of that. That is a good question that I'll have to look up. So if that person wants to share their email address with you and you could share that with me, I could get them further information.
Sure, and we'll have some information. They can also reach out to both turf removal as well as your information.
Perfect, yes.
And I guess, one more. What is the best practice for some of the tulips that you mentioned in the winter to kind of prepare them for that solid performing spring?
Yeah, so tulips, what's great about those spring blooming bulbs is that they don't need a lot. I would say after they're done flowering, you can remove the flower, but be sure to leave the foliage. If they're one, and I'm trying to think of a bulb that you would plant that wouldn't be hardy, but good mulch, you might give them a deep drink of water in the fall before we get into that really cold freezing period. But just the Dutch tulips, they are just kind of notorious where they bloom when they want to. They're kind of divas. So the species tulips wouldn't have that issue. They really are far more reliable, but those are the basic care of bulbs.
Awesome. I had quite a few pop up, or just tulips pop up in my yard this year. So that's
good. They're random.
Yeah. Great. Well, we can go ahead and go into summer then.
Okay. So let's move into summer and some hot days. So these are the plants that are going to do well when we get above 80 degrees. Oh my gosh, we will get there probably one day and it will be too hot for us. So let's talk about plants for summer color. So again, I'll start off with perennials. These again are our herbaceous plants, and coneflower. I'll talk about coneflower because that is a classic summer perennial that is in most Colorado gardens. But I'm going to actually start with the orange carpet Hummingbird Trumpet. And I wish I could just do a whole presentation on this plant because it is one of my absolute favorites. This was a Plant Select introduction in 2001. And like the name says, it actually is a great attractor for hummingbirds. And so if that's a species that you want to have visit your landscape, this is a great plant because those tubular flowers, you can see that they're bright orange. The hummingbirds just love to stick their beaks in and get the nectar from those flowers. So this is a ground cover perennial, so it only gets to maybe 12 to 15 inches tall. So it is a little shorter in stature, but it does spread. So it becomes this beautiful matte carpet of blooms for months. Really, that's how long it blooms. So it has these orange trumpet flowers, and it really will bloom from midsummer, and I would say probably the end of June, early July, all the way through frost. And it doesn't need to be deadheaded. It is absolutely wonderful, and it loves hot, dry conditions. Once you get it established with some water, it will take off and do really well. This is in my front yard. So this was taken last year, June 15th. We're not nearly as far along this year, of course. It's only maybe a couple inches out of the ground, but it's planted near a shrub rose, which are also pretty drought tolerant, which is nice. And this was right before it started to put on blooms. So the foliage is kind of a lighter green, almost silvery color. And then again, this plant will be covered in orange blooms from July through the end of the summer. So there it is in all its glory. This is one that can do really well in full sun, and I would recommend that you have a really sunny spot for this. It can do okay in part shade, but you will sacrifice a lot of the flowers in that case. So you might get some nice foliage, but you're not going to have nearly as many blooms. So water the first season to get it established, and then it will tolerate pretty dry soil. It doesn't mind a little bit of extra water, so I actually have mine planted near the lawn, and so it does get a little bit of overlap from lawn irrigation, and it does really well. It won't spread as much if it's in a truly drought tolerant situation or a truly xeric situation. It does need fairly good drainage, and really all you have to do for this plant, and this is my little secret, is every spring or in the fall, depending on what you want to do, I take my lawnmower and I mow it down. That is what I do. I put the bag on my lawnmower, I set the blade higher, and instead of cutting it all back by hand, which I find to be laborious, I really just mow it down. And then every year it comes back. So that June picture that I showed you, I had done a spring mow and it had grown that much. Last fall, I mowed it down because it just looked a little too gangly for my eyes. And so it is again starting to come back, but really a very low maintenance perennial and pretty hardy as well. The next one is chocolate flower, and this is a native species. And if you're not familiar with chocolate flower, you really need to plant some in your landscape because it truly smells like chocolate. It's absolutely amazing. And the scent is best in the morning. So if you can plant it where you'll have your morning cup of coffee or where you go out to get the morning newspaper, that is where you want to plant chocolate flower. And it's really one that doesn't want to be bothered. It doesn't need any extra water once it's established, and it can get up to 20 inches tall, and it can reseed, which is really nice. Again, another one, I wouldn't consider it invasive by any stretch of the imagination, but if that is a worrisome thing for you, then I would remove the flowers before they go to seed. And this one was introduced from Plant Select in 2004. It is a flower that needs some good drainage, and really don't pamper it. It is not one that needs regular water. It would really prefer to live on the edge, as we would like to say. So get it established with regular water, but then just let it go. You can cut it back in July because it tends to get a little bit leggy midsummer. And if you do cut it back, and what that means is really just whack it back to the ground, or at least by half, it will usually do another set of blooms into the fall months, which is really nice. So it kind of grows and then it sprawls a little bit, so it doesn't maintain a really nice uniform habit. But again, cutting it back by about half, then you can get more of a second set of blooms, which is great, and then also keep a tidier shape as well. Coneflower is kind of the poster child for Colorado landscapes. I love coneflower. It is hardy to zone 3, and this is one. So my dad lives north of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. This is one that he can grow really well, and he is cold. So, you know, just be fortunate that you're not living where my dad is. So the name Echinacea comes from the Greek for hedgehog, and you can see a little bit where it gets that name. So those center cones are really pretty spiky. This is one that does best in full sun. It is very drought tolerant once it's established, and a great pollinator plant. And Echinacea purpurea is just the purple coneflower. That's the one featured here. But the fun thing is that there's been so much breeding going on into coneflowers because they are so popular and very adaptable that there's lots of different colors on the market. So I have a couple photos of those coming up. The plants can reach heights of 4 feet, and they can also reseed in the landscape. And I will say that coneflower might be a problem child. I have found it in places that I did not expect to see. It can get a little bit out of control. And so again, if that becomes a problem in your landscape, prune off the heads before they go fully to seed, and then that will prevent that from happening. The good thing is that you can tell when it's a coneflower. You can then dig it up if it's in an area that you don't want, but it does find these niches, these little pockets of soil where it will do well, where nothing else will grow. So coneflowers do have an uncanny knack to kind of fill in gaps. It's a great cut flower. It has really nice long stems, and it will last at least a week in a vase. And the nice thing is that if you can leave those seeds, it will be such a great thing for the birds during the fall and winter months. And so do consider leaving them. It also adds some nice fall and winter interest to your garden. So it is a good thing to consider doing if you want that. But some people don't like the look of it, and I can respect that as well. One that just came out of the CSU perennial trials. So up on campus, Dr. Klett and his crew do 3-year perennial trials. These are plants that spend 2 winters, I have to get this right. They spend 2 winters in the ground and then 3 summers, and they are evaluated every month based on flower, disease, pollination, all of those things. You know, how do they really do, and should they be introduced by CSU as a recommended perennial? This is one that came out of the trials last year. It's called Sombrero Trace Amigos. And what's absolutely phenomenal about this coneflower is that it has 3 different flower colors in one plant, which is great. So you can see that it has kind of a lilac purple, and then more of a kind of a reddish, and then a magenta. Dr. Klett said that these overwintered beautifully. They had really nice compact growth and flowers all summer long. So this has a lot of potential. So consider planting this one. This should be readily available in the garden centers this spring. Maybe not the box stores, but at least your independent garden centers. Moving on to lavender, one of the famous herbs that we should all be growing. And then of course, on the western slope of Colorado, a lot of people have gotten into lavender growing. And so they actually have a lavender festival, usually at the end of July or August. And this is an herb that really grows well in our alkaline soils. And so lavender overwinters really well. Sometimes it gets a little bit of dieback, but does really well in full sun and is drought tolerant. Plus you have the benefit of having it as either a culinary herb, as an aromatic, or you have it as an ornamental. So it really fits all of these different categories. And again, this is such a perfect climate to grow this plant. They do prefer full sun. They really don't want any sort of heavily amended soils. So I would say that this would almost be like a lot of our natives, where it really prefers more lean soils, something that's not heavily amended. And I will say, because sometimes we run into winter hardiness issues depending on the cultivar that you plant, try to get this in the ground in the spring so it has a full season to establish. Fall planted lavender generally gets more dieback than spring planted. And it will prefer just small doses of water during the summer months to really help keep that shape. If that's not so important to you, I have lavender that never gets any supplemental water, and to me it looks just fine. But if you are harvesting it for the flowers or for any of those purposes, a little bit of extra water is going to help with flower production. The English lavender, there's two types that you can grow, the English and then the lavandin, and I'll talk about both. So the English lavender are the ones that are hardy to zone 5, and so if you're higher up in elevation, you might not want to plant lavender. These are also plants that will bloom twice in one season. So after the first set of flowers, you can cut it back by half. So just cut off the entire plant by half, and it usually will put up a second set of flowers. They're not going to be as prolific as the first set, but you will get some fall flowers as well. The names that sound English are generally our English cultivars. So Hidcote, Munstead, Mitcham Gray, all of those sound very English. And so those are the cultivars that are going to do well in your garden. Lavandin is another one that can do really well. They tend to be larger plants, and those cultivars are Grosso. There's a white flowered one called White Grosso. Provenance is one too. And what you should know about lavandin is that they only will bloom once. If you are growing lavender for any of the essential oils that you plan to harvest, and that's a whole other process that we can't talk about, but if you are looking to actually harvest the oils, which does take special machinery, the lavandins usually produce more oils, but it's not as high a quality as the English types. If you just want them in your garden for ornamental use to attract those pollinators, either will do well. I have had great success with the English types. You may consider mulching them, so taking some extra wood mulch in the fall and really trying to protect the crown, because if we do have a weird cold snap in the winter or an exceptionally dry winter like we've had, again, you can see some of that dieback. There's the cutest little lavender that you've ever seen. It's called Weone. This was introduced by Plant Select in 2017, and it only gets to be about 12 to 14 inches tall. It is perfect for rock gardens, so you can actually plant it in the crevices of your rock garden. If any of you are in northern Colorado in the Windsor area, we have a wonderful demonstration garden called Treasure Island, and there is a rock crevice garden on the north side of the garden, and they have Weone planted in all of these little pockets, and it is adorable. It is an English type, so look out for Weone. So cute. Okay, moving into trees and shrubs for summer. The first shrub is lead plant, and you might think, well, gosh, that looks a lot like Russian sage, and it kind of does. And I would say that this is a great substitute for Russian sage, because Russian sage really is more of an invasive species than we care to admit. But this is a Colorado native. It's in the pea family, and so it has those beautiful purple pea-like flowers. It is so tolerant to everything: soil type, moisture, full sun. You know, this is a tough as nails plant. Lead plant is a wonderful plant, and I have really enjoyed having it in my garden. The thing about lead plant is that it is so slow to wake up in the spring. I just looked at mine over the weekend, nothing going on. It looks dead, but I promise you, it is not dead. If you plant this, just have patience. It usually doesn't start to bud out until sometime maybe middle to late May. It really is a late blooming plant, but then it will have these beautiful purple flowers in the summer months. I have not found it to be super readily available. So this is one that if you see it, you should probably buy it. I think it's pretty popular. Another great purple blooming plant is Blue Miss Spirea. This is not a true Spirea, so this is Caryopteris, but it does look a lot like our typical shrub Spirea, but this is a wonderful plant again. It does prefer full sun. We call it a shrub, but it's really herbaceous, which means it mostly has the herbaceous foliage, but it can turn a little bit woody, so it gets slightly confusing. The great thing about Blue Miss Spirea is it has an exceptionally long bloom time, at least 2 months, and the bees absolutely go crazy over this plant. And so I would say, if you're really looking for a pollinator-friendly plant, put a Blue Miss Spirea into your landscape. It's also extremely xeric. It really doesn't need any sort of supplemental moisture once it's established. In the spring with your Blue Miss Spirea, you are going to prune it back hard. And what that means is that essentially you're going to cut it to the ground as close as you can. Generally, if you can get at least half of it, 2/3, maybe only 4 to 6 inches remaining, that is going to be fine because it is going to put on new growth and bloom from new growth that is formed during the spring and summer. So don't be afraid to whack this guy back. It will only benefit the plant and it will have really consistent blooms. A couple of cultivars, there's Dark Night, there's First Choice, there's Blue Mist. They have ones that are smaller, maybe 3 to 4 feet tall, and then some that are larger, up to 6 feet tall. So just pick one that works for you. They all have similar characteristics. I'll do really well in Waterwise gardens. This is a great one that you should really consider adding this spring. Another shrub is Apache Plume. And I will admit that Apache Plume is not my favorite plant, but it does deserve credit. So Apache Plume has its own characteristics. This is a native, so it's a native to the Southwest. And what is cool is that they have these really cool anemone-like seed heads. And so this is the flower, these little white, typical 5-petal flower, but then those fade into these anemone-like seed heads after they bloom. And I absolutely love the look of the seed heads, just not a huge fan of the flowers. So this is a plant that you really just need to plant it, give it room to grow, and then don't bother it. It's not one that wants to be pruned on a regular basis. It's a great plant. It can absolutely get every bit of 6 feet tall and wide. So this is one that you do need to give adequate space. In terms of a plant, it is full sun. It is very drought tolerant. It loves the heat. It loves any sort of bad soil that you can give it. Apache Plume is a really lovely plant. And you can see in the wind, those seed heads, they kind of move. And so it does add a lot of texture to the garden. Now, I love all of those things. My problem with it is that it kind of looks a little scrubby. It looks a little unkempt. Sometimes to me, I say it kind of looks like an unmade bed, just a little bit messy. You can tell that I'm kind of a more tidy gardener, and that's just a personal preference. I have seen Apache Plume in gardens, and it is absolutely a showstopper because, again, it blooms in the summer. It has those beautiful seed heads that are retained through the fall and has a lot of wonderful characteristics. So just know it has its pros and cons, but a lot of people love it, and I think it is to be celebrated as a plant. One of our trees that blooms in the summer is Golden Rain Tree, and this is a fantastic little ornamental. It's a small to medium-sized tree, about 30 by 30 at maturity, and it blooms in the middle of July. So what tree blooms in July? Well, the golden rain tree does, and it has these beautiful yellow blooms that absolutely cover the tree. And then as they start to fade, they shatter apart, and then those petals drop. And so that's why it's called the golden rain tree, because it looks like it's raining golden petals. Then those flowers develop into these lantern-like seed heads, which persist through the fall and into the winter. So it really does have kind of a more exotic oriental look, which is really wonderful. And again, we don't have a lot of trees that bloom in the middle of the summer. It'd be a great patio tree. There it is in full bloom, and you can see that it is a showstopper. There's one planted just a couple streets away, and it's very noticeable when it's in bloom, which is nice. The seed heads start as kind of a light green color, and then they'll fade to more of this chocolate brown, and they get really pretty crispy and papery, which is nice. Smokebush, I had to call attention to because I think it's just such a cool looking shrub. It can be either a large shrub or a smaller multi-stem tree, however you want to describe it. They do have both green leaves and purple leaves. The purple leaf is the purple smokebush, and it really does best in areas where it's going to get full sun. So if you really want that developed red color, plant it in full sun because it will have the most color. If it's planted more in the shade, the leaves will actually fade to more of a green color, which is fine. It still looks great. But what's really cool, and it's called smokebush, is because the blooms look like plumes of smoke on the shrub itself. So here's the plant in full bloom, and it has these really wispy kind of pinkish blooms that completely cover the plant. It's absolutely beautiful. Gets to be about 8 to 10 feet tall and wide. So I would say it is more of a larger shrub, but it could be considered a small tree as well. So here's the green leaf type. And again, those blooms are a little bit more pink, and then the red leaf type and the blooms are going to be just a little bit more maroon in color. But the smokebush is such a fun shrub. Great to talk to kids about plants with this one because you can really imagine and make stories up about why it's called smokebush. Okay, I'll pause there, Melanie, if there are questions.
Awesome. You know, I can't decide if I was so drawn to that Tres Amigos plant with three colors, but then you really sold me on that Weone Lavender. So cute. So actually, first question is about that one. Can the Weone grow in shade, or does it need full sun?
All the lavenders really do need full sun, especially if you're looking for those blooms, which is why you would plant a lavender. So I would stick to full sun for those.
All right. So a couple of questions about the golden rain tree. Is it drought tolerant, and is it best in full sun?
It is best in full sun, and I would say that it can tolerate periods of drought. So again, if we're having, a really dry summer, you might want to give it supplemental water if it's not getting it from another source. But I wouldn't go as far to say that it's drought tolerant.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Is it too late in the season right now to prune the Spirea?
The bloom is Spirea, I'm assuming?
Probably, yes.
Yeah, and I would say no. If you want to prune it, go ahead and do that. Just understand that you'll probably be pruning off some of the new growth, but it's a plant that grows really well. So I would say go ahead if that's something you want to do, go ahead and do that.
Okay, and can lavender also be pruned in the spring?
Yes, so lavender is one that you would want to prune in the spring, and you would go back to where you start seeing new growth coming out. So I would almost encourage you to wait a little bit later in spring. So maybe early April to nowish, just to see where the new growth is coming to. And then that's where you can prune back to.
Okay, cool. And just a quick clarification, when you were talking about cutting earlier, cutting the plant back by half, you're referring to the height, not the square footage. Is that
correct? The height of the plant, cut it back by half. Yes.
Awesome. And I guess we'll get one more in here if you've got time. So Fort Collins requires amending soil after turf removal, but you've stated a couple plants do not like heavily amended soil. Would you call this type of amendment heavily amended?
Oh, yes. I've actually had this conversation with the city before. I think that's a question, or that's a conversation maybe we should have offline. So if that person could contact me, my email will be at the end of the conversation. So maybe email me and we'll chat about that.
That sounds great. All right, let's go into fall.
Okay. So we have made it through spring. Wow, we're just flying through the seasons already. So now we're in fall, and fall to me is the best time of the year. I think you get everything that's wonderful. So you have vegetables coming in, you have some cooler days, which is appreciated. And then of course we get some beautiful fall color as well. So let's start it off with perennials for fall color. And if you haven't, you should really give nod to the ornamental grasses, because I think some of the ornamental grasses give us the best fall color, and you may not even notice or realize that they may do that. So the first one is little blue stem. This is a native grass that has actually been introduced into the ornamental market. So little blue stem and big blue stem are actually native grasses in the Eastern Plains. So where we have more of our grasslands going into Nebraska and Kansas. So these cohabitate regularly, but people, nursery propagators, have taken introductions of the best little blue stems and then introduced them into the market and have named them as such. This is a warm season grass, and so it's a grass that won't really start growing until June. So just know that it's not dead. It needs some warmer days and some warmer temperatures and soil to really get going. But this is one that will do really well in poor, dry soils, so does well, just like our other native friends. It does keep this really nice, tight habitat during the entire growing season. And for a grass, that's really important. We could talk about lodging in grasses, and what lodging is essentially the grass flops over, splits down the middle, and little blue stem really keeps that nice compact form. Multiple cultivars have been introduced, and almost all of them have excellent fall color. Even the native blue stems that you would see if you take a drive out east during the fall, they will have nice fall color. But again, these cultivars have been introduced as ones that have even better fall color. So one of those is called Standing Ovation, and the University of Minnesota has actually done a lot of plant breeding and introduction around these ornamental blue stems. And Standing Ovation is one of the ones they have introduced. And the name kind of says it all. It's a tall, proud little ornamental grass reaching about 3 feet tall with really excellent fall color. So it's green during the summer months, kind of a bluish green color, and then turns into this, I think, really outstanding kind of a muted russet red color during the fall months. So it's not those bright sugar maple reds that you might be hoping for, but more of like the lighter red purples. But again, we're getting some fall color from an ornamental grass. The nice thing is that this grass will remain upright. It has some really beautiful seed heads that are going to be retained through the winter months. And that's another benefit of having ornamental grasses in your landscape, is that you can leave them standing through the winter for winter interest and then cut them back in the spring. Blaze is another one introduced by the University of Minnesota. This is not my cat. This is actually a photo from High Country Gardens. But I do love this orange tabby in front of Blaze in its full color because they really blend in. So if you have an orange cat, maybe you should also plant Blaze little blue stem. But it's a beautiful grass. It's not quite the purples of the Standing Ovation. It's a little bit more orange, but just know that's another introduction that you could consider. Moving into switchgrass, this is panicum. And the switchgrasses, they are native to Nebraska, Kansas, into southern Minnesota. But just know that, again, just like our little blue stems, there have been several ornamental introductions made from our native stands of grass. This is a taller species, up to 5 feet tall. So again, the little blue stems were maybe 2 to 3 feet. Switchgrass is much larger, so make sure that you site it accordingly. It's another warm season, so give it time to green up in the spring. And this is another one that won't lodge during the winter months. So it will retain its really nice upright form. Some of the selections have great fall color. So let's look at a couple of those. There are so many different switchgrass cultivars, and what I love is that it does have this really nice columnar form. When it gets its flowers in the late summer, they look like fireworks. So they're like plumes of fireworks. So a little bit similar to the smoke bush, which we just saw, but it is an ornamental grass. And so I like to think that, you know, it's blooming right after the 4th of July. The one pictured here is called Northwind. That's actually an introduction from the University of Minnesota again. And again, you can see how it has that nice compact form. Again, 4 to 5 feet tall, but this is a really good plant that if you don't necessarily have the space for a shrub on the corner of your house, you could actually help define some of those corners with ornamental grasses because they reach good heights. So here's Northwind in the fall. You can see how it has more of a yellow color. You can see those flowers in full bloom. And so it really does. And it has such a nice rustling sound when the wind comes through. So it's really a gentle rustle. So Northwind is a great switchgrass cultivar that you could consider with more of the yellow streaks during the fall months. Shenandoah is one of my absolute favorites. You can see how it's paired next to coneflowers. So Melanie, if you want those coneflowers, you could pair it with Shenandoah. And you can see how it's starting to get these little flames of red starting at the top of the plant. So it has more of a pinkish bloom, and then it's going to get those really dark red foliage streaks in the fall, and it is outstanding. This is such a beautiful ornamental grass. I happened to accidentally plant it next to an autumn joy sedum, which also blooms in the fall, and it was such a happy mistake just because the combination of that pink with the red and the green just looks absolutely beautiful. So Shenandoah is a great one. Heavy metal is a bluish green color during the summer months, and then in the fall can get shades of, again, yellow. So heavy metal is another great one. And again, it just depends on what you're looking for. If you want more of the reds, you can pick more of the red switchgrasses, go with some of the more little blue stems. If you like the yellows, you could do that as well. But it's just important to remember that a lot of these ornamental grasses have some nice fall color. The next perennial is hardy plumbago, also called the false plumbago. It can be called either way. What I love about the plumbago is that it does bloom late into the summer and it has blue blooms, which is wonderful. There are so many few true blue colors that we generally see in our landscapes. And so this is a ground cover, really beautiful blue blooms. And it's going to bloom when the rest of the garden is kind of done. So we all reach that point in usually late August, early September, where we're getting tired, the garden is getting tired. And so this is a plant that really kind of perks things up. And it is one that can do well in shade. And so if you have a shady area, it could do well. I wouldn't say it can do well in full shade, but it can do well in very part shade, in most soil types as well. Only about 8 inches tall. Here's the plumbago. Sorry, the picture is fuzzy, but here it is in full bloom. You can see how when it's really happy, how great those blooms look, and then they fade into kind of little spiky bulbs on top of the plant. But what's also amazing about hardy plumbago is that it has really beautiful red fall color. So this is a great ground cover, again, shade or sun, that has beautiful red fall color. So this is one that I think is unappreciated. I think it's one we could plant more just because it is tolerant, has nice late summer blooms, and then has this really nice red fall color. A lot is going for it. It could do well if you have a spot maybe that is planted under or near a tree that you need to fill it in, or you don't want just mulch there. So give it a shot, see how you like it. I do have to give attention to both the sedums and the semps, the hen and chicks, as we like to call them. So the succulents also can have really nice fall color. The sedums, there's such huge diversity in the plants. So you can have hens and chicks, You can have more of the autumn joy sedums, which are a little bit taller with really large flowers. You can have some of the ground cover sedums. All of these plants have more fleshy leaves. They tolerate poor soils. They tolerate drought. I find the flowers to be distracting. I actually just like the ground cover. The flower sometimes on them, especially with hens and chicks, isn't ideal. I think it's a little too jarring, but you can decide when you plant them. And the sedums also do attract pollinators. One of the ones that I think has a place in every garden is Angelina. She is absolutely gorgeous. And so during the summer months and in the spring, she's this beautiful lime green color. And then as we get colder days and maybe the first nip of frost, or when we get temperatures down into the 30s, she will turn this beautiful orangey russet color that is just a showstopper. She will stay that color all winter. And then as she puts on new growth, it will be that lime green color again in the spring. But so versatile. I have found her to be gently creeping in spots, but she's not invasive. And really all you have to do is just peel her up and then replant her somewhere else. You know, these are so easy to propagate. They're so easy to grow. The one thing is that they will not tolerate water. So do not consider watering these after they're established. They just would like to be alone. Woodland stonecrop is going to get a little bit of the red hints of fall color as well. So some of your true ground covers will also get some reddish on the tips, which is really attractive. There are true hens and chicks that have red color all summer long. I actually just planted one. I found it at a box store and I couldn't live without it. So I just put that into my garden. So they'll actually retain that nice red color through the spring and summer and then well into the fall. This is one called Jet, but there are many, many different types of hens and chicks out there. Ruby Heart has really nice variegation, and again, not specific to fall color, but again, we're looking, I think a lot of us equate fall color with some of the reds, the oranges, and so these are plants that can really sustain those colors into the fall season. Moving into trees for fall color, I will say, so this is my disclaimer, that these are just suggestions. This is not a comprehensive list. There are so many great plants. I will tell you, I will not recommend aspen. I think aspen is a tough one to grow in most urban situations. If you're in the mountains, aspen is a perfect choice, but I didn't even include it in this list because I think sometimes we give so much attention to aspen that we sometimes forget about other trees that we could consider planting. Just remember that with trees, these are permanent features of the landscape. Make sure it fits your site, make sure that you have the water to support it, and then always plant it properly. We just celebrated Arbor Day last Friday, and so it's a great time to plant a tree. The garden centers are full of plants, and it can be a great thing to add to your landscape. So a couple of trees for fall color. The first is serviceberry. We do have native serviceberries that are available, but just know that this is what we call an understory tree. This is a tree that prefers a little bit more shade. It tends to grow underneath the canopy of other larger species, and it can reach heights of about 20 feet tall, 15 feet wide. So this is more of an ornamental. I would for sure call this at least a 3-season tree. And so it has beautiful white blooms followed by wonderful fruit that's actually edible if you can eat them before the birds do. They kind of taste like blueberries, which is nice. And then it has really nice fall color as well. This is a tree that can be sold as a single stem or a clump. So you might have multiple branches arising from the bottom. And then it has really nice kind of yellow, orange to reddish fall color. Autumn Brilliance is one that was selected especially for its exceptional fall color. Looking at this tree through the season, so here's serviceberry in spring. I just noticed that mine were starting to break buds, so we'll be seeing yellow flowers, the white flowers in the next few weeks. So they tend to bloom around the time of the crab apples. And again, the blooms completely cover the tree, which is really beautiful. In the summer, it's just kind of green, doesn't do a lot. The leaves are a little bit larger, so you might get some nice wind movement through the leaves, but we're not talking about a shade tree. This is more of an ornamental. So again, only about 20 feet tall. But in the fall is where this plant shines. So serviceberry in the fall, again, we can have shades of orange to even red, and the fall color really is exceptional. So if you're one missing some of those reds and oranges that you might have grown up with, serviceberry could really fill that niche. So even though I said it's primarily a species that likes the shade, it will do well in full sun. It's a very versatile plant, very drought tolerant once established. Again, might need some water if it's extreme drought. The next is an actual shade tree. This is Shumard oak, Quercus shumardii. This is a native tree to the Midwest, but actually it's doing really well in Colorado. So it's adapting well to our local conditions. The thing is we haven't planted a lot of these, and so we would love some more replication. I'm part of the Windsor Tree Board, and we actually had this tree in our tree sale not too long ago. And all of the 5th graders in Fort Collins, if you have a 5th grader in Fort Collins, will take home this tree for Arbor Day this year. So it is an oak, and so it will reach heights of about 40 to 60 feet tall. Of course, shade trees take a long time to get there. So this is a tree that will mature over decades. And this is one that will tolerate our alkaline soils. And that's where we have to be really careful with some of our tree selections, is because a plant like autumn blaze maple doesn't do well with our higher pH soils. Some of the oaks, like pin oaks or red oaks, don't do well with our higher pH soils. And so tree selection really is important. And then talking to someone who's knowledgeable about your local conditions and getting the right tree for the right place is key. But Shumard oak has been found to be really pretty adaptable. This is one that will have the reddish fall color. A lot of our oaks like bur oak or English oak have more of a yellow fall color. So this is nice because it has those shades of red. It has your typical acorn. It's a nice looking oak tree. It's kind of your standard tree. It doesn't, it's a more rounded canopy, and again, can get to be 40 to 60 feet tall at maturity. But yowza, look at that. The fall color is outstanding, and it really does have some of those red oak qualities, which is really nice. So really nice, kind of a crimson red fall color. Depending on the season, the fall color may differ. If we have a really dry summer and a really hot fall, the fall color usually isn't as good. So we do like a little bit more moisture from those monsoon rains we can get in the summer months, which will lead to better fall color for all of us. Ohio buckeye also has really nice fall color. I did go to Ohio State, so this is the state tree of Ohio, and it is really adaptable to Colorado. I have seen a lot of Ohio buckeye planted not only in our parks, but also along streetscapes, and it is one that I think should be planted more. So it's a smaller tree, only about 35 feet tall. It does maintain a really nice rounded form. The one downside is that because it has larger leaves, it has these palmate-shaped leaves with 5 leaflets per leaf, those leaves can actually tatter a little bit in the wind. But if you are an Ohio State fan, and hopefully didn't go to Michigan, it does have a lucky fruit. So every good buckeye always has a buckeye on them for luck, and I'll show you what those look like. The great thing about it is that it has these beautiful white flowers that sit upright in the tree in the spring. And so it almost looks tropical, which is really great. So nice big white flowers in the spring, and then those develop into these fruits. And so there's the buckeye itself, called that because it almost looks like a buck's eye, a deer. So with the lighter colored center, and then that kind of dark chocolate colored brown. They are poisonous, so don't eat them, but the squirrels will get to them before you can. So just know that they are really attractive, and you can carry one around in your pocket. Fall color for the buckeye can be orangish, reddish. There is a newer introduction called Autumn Splendor. This was introduced from the Morton Arboretum in Illinois. The Arnold Arboretum out east. And so this was an introduction specifically selected to have really outstanding fall colors. So again, shades of orange, maybe some reds, almost the maroon, but overall the fall color on the Autumn Splendor is excellent. So give that a consideration. Honey locust can be a really nice yellow tree in the fall, which is really great. This is a really common tree. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the honey locust. I think it's maybe a little bit overplanted, but it does depend on the neighborhood that you're in. And so if you don't have a lot of them, you could consider planting a honey locust. They do have pods, which some people like, some people don't like. It depends on your tolerance of fruit. Just know that there are podless types available if that's not something that you're interested in. But really, it's a good shade tree. It provides more dappled shade, kind of some sort of light infiltration. And I would say in terms of fall colors, some cultivars are going to be better than others. So if you are interested in having a honey locust for the yellow fall color, do your selections accordingly. Here are the pods. They do retain through the winter months. And so again, some people love them, some people don't like them, but I find them interesting. Maybe it's just me, but they do provide a little bit of winter interest. They tend to curl, which is kind of fun, and they do eventually drop off in the spring. But if maintenance and cleaning up those isn't your forte, then go with a podless type that they have available. Skyline honey locust is one of the most common ones, has really excellent yellow to orangish fall color, almost like a peachy fall color, which is really great. It will be green during the summer months. It will have all the same characteristics as the regular honey locust. It was just selected because it has some nice fall color. And Sunburst is one that has more of a yellowy foliage color during the season. So this is actually taken in the middle of summer, and you can see how it might almost look chlorotic to you. It almost looks too yellow, but just know that this is the natural color of this plant. So you might love it, you might not like it, but Sunburst could be one that you could add to your landscape. A couple of shrubs for fall color. Let's move on to shrubs. Pawnee Butte sand cherry is one of our native shrubs and has amazing fall color. It also has amazing flowers in the spring months as well, which is really great. That's a photograph of the flowers, which will be coming very, very soon. It is so nice. So this is a ground cover shrub, only reaches heights of about 18 inches tall, but spreads up to 6 feet. This is one. Please, please, please do not plant it where it ever needs to be pruned. This is not one that should ever be pruned. Just let it grow, let it fill in the space. So make sure that you do site it appropriately and give it room to spread. But the white flowers are abundant in the early spring, completely covering the shrub itself. Very cold hardy, pollinator friendly. There's a lot going for this, and plus it's a native, which is really great. It's excellent with fall color, really nice red fall color. So this one really checks, again, a lot of boxes. Spring flowers, nice green foliage in the summer months, and then really beautiful red fall color in the fall. But again, please plant it where it never needs to be pruned. It will be so much happier in the long run. Another one is autumn amber sumac. This is a plant select plant introduced in 2014. It is a type of roost, so roost trilobata. Trilobata just means 3-leaf sumac. So this can be one that you could introduce. This was introduced from a Colorado native. So the 3-leaf sumac is a native, and then this was a selected introduction that entered into the market. It's another more ground cover shrub, only about 10 to 14 inches tall, with up to 8 feet. So this is another one that you want to give room to spread. It will easily take up a corner or a space, very drought tolerant, full sun, and absolutely beautiful fall color. So it does get little yellow flowers in the spring. They're not that interesting. That's not really why we would grow it. You can see why it's called the 3-leaf sumac, because it has those 3 leaflets that make up a leaf. Does get some red fruit. It's not super plentiful. I would say it's more sparse, But the reason why we plant this is because the fall color is outstanding. So shades of yellow and orange and red, and it really is absolutely beautiful in the landscape. This is, again, another one, a ground cover, only about 14 inches tall, 8 feet wide, with excellent red fall color. The Oregon grape holly, there's two types. There is the repens, which is the creeping type, and then there's the aquifolium, which is more of the shrub. You could plant either. Both do equally well in the landscape, just depends on if you want one that's taller or more of a ground cover. This is what we call a broadleaf evergreen, and it really does look a lot like holly. So if you miss holly from a previous location you've lived in, this might fit the bill. And it's one of the few evergreens that can really tolerate shade. So this is one that could grow in full, dense shade. The fall color might not be as great, but just know that the plant will survive. Incredibly drought tolerant once it's established. This is really versatile. It can be planted in full sun, can go into full shade, very drought tolerant once it's established, and has a lot of great characteristics. So beautiful yellow flowers. And when they're set against those dark green leaves in the spring, really does make an impact. So just such a clear, pretty yellow flower, which then fades into a blue fruit, which are not edible, so please don't eat them, but the fruit is very attractive. And again, against that dark green, shiny evergreen-like leaf, it's really, really pretty. And then, so this is what it looks like in the landscape. This is taken at the gardens on Spring Creek. So this was in summer, usually, I think this was around July or August when I took this photo. Again, you can see how it has those nice pointy leaves, really does look a lot like holly. And then the fall color is outstanding, like a true scarlet red, and those fruits are going to be retained. So then you have this blue-red combination, which is simply to die for. My dad actually has this growing in his garden, which is zone 3A, doing really well in Minnesota. So this is one that you could consider. And again, you can do either the more ground cover type or the larger shrub type. It's up to you. They both behave the same. Red twig dogwood is one on there. I think everyone's familiar with red twig dogwood. We see it a lot, planted in everything from HOAs to McDonald's parking lots. It's just a really common shrub, maybe too common, but it does have some nice red fall color, so I wanted to give it a little bit of credit. It can reach heights of 8 feet with a spread of up to 12. And so there are shorter cultivars available, but just know the true shrub can get to be very, very large. The foliage is either just a plain green, or it might be a variegated with the green and white. It does have white flowers in the spring. And the reason we plant this, besides it being very tolerant to a lot of cultural conditions such as water and everything else, is that it has these bright red stems. And they really are a beautiful red color. This is one, though, that you do need to prune on a regular basis to keep those stems nice and red. As it gets older, as those stems start to mature and get thicker, they're going to lose that red color. So if you have one in your landscape that doesn't have as great a color, you should start pruning it right now. So here are red twig dogwood in the spring. So it has these what we call corum flowers, kind of flat top white flowers set against the green foliage. And there are some introductions that have really nice fall color. So Arctic Fire is one. That is the fall color of Arctic Fire, and it is very tempting to plant this into the landscape because it has such nice fall color. Cardinal is another one. The fall color isn't as great, but this one has really bright red stems. And if you offset that in a landscape that might get regular snowfall with the red and the white, it is going to be such a powerful look during the winter months. So nice fall color and then great winter interest as well. Okay, so I'll pause there and take some more questions. We should finish on time, if not a little bit early.
Perfect. Wow, those colors are all amazing. And I Have to admit, I have a small connection to Ohio and sure I'm a sucker for the Buckeye.
Yay!
I was glad to see that.
So does Jess.
Yeah, I know. It's great. Okay, well, let's see if we can get into some of these questions. Will the hens and chicks come back each year? Is that pretty easy?
Yes. So hens and chicks are kind of an interesting creature. They do come back each year. After the hen, the mother plant flowers, she will actually die, but then she forms the chicks, which are the little smaller plants, and then those will overwinter. So they might get a little bit of dieback, maybe a little bit of leaf tip browning, but the actual plant stays evergreen, if you will, throughout the winter months. So it is something that stays green. So they don't go to mush on the ground. They will actually retain their form.
Cool. All right. So about the sedum, I believe I'm saying that right. How long to establish that before you stop watering it?
So I would say for most of these plants, at least one growing season. So if you plant them in the spring, look to give them regular water through at least midsummer. And then even if it gets really hot, I would still continue that. But the general rule of thumb is about one season.
Okay, great. So for the Pawnee sand cherry, how much sun is needed and how do they do with transplantation?
So full sun for that one. And then I'm assuming by transplanting, you mean taking it from a container and putting it into the landscape, not moving it.
Let's see, it says, do they tolerate transplantation? So,
okay. So I'll talk about it both ways. From a container, they're going to transplant fine. So you would plant it like any other shrub, put it in the ground, make sure the hole is wide enough, water it in well. Now, if you have to move it, it may not like it very much. And so I will say that I would only do that if it's absolutely 100% necessary. And then even then think again if it's absolutely necessary. Because I think once they're established, once they're planted, they're kind of happy. So I don't think they'll do well being moved.
That is good advice then. Okay, let's see. So you mentioned that some plants definitely need more of that time in the spring to really be established. Are there any of these plants that do much better being established in the fall or be planted in the fall?
Yeah, so with the exception, so I will say that the ones you should plant in the spring would be the lavender. That was one. And then I would also say the evergreens. So we'll talk about evergreens in the winter. So both of those would do better being planted in the spring, so they have a full season to establish. Almost everything else, I'm trying to think of an exception. Everything else could do well being planted late summer into the fall. If you plant too late, then you're looking at providing some supplemental water. And I would say that anyway, if you fall plant anything, once you turn off your irrigation system, make sure that you're doing regular water as often as you can until the ground freezes. In the Front Range, that's generally sometime mid to late November. But then when we have nice days on sunny days above 40, so we get those all the time in the winter months, I would also go out and water your newly planted trees and shrubs and then your perennials too. And then mulch will help. So mulch will help retain soil moisture and help with those crazy temperature fluctuations.
Okay, that is great advice. All right, and quick last question, when should the dogwood be pruned?
So the dogwood would be a spring pruning, so you could do that now. And it would be, I always get this term confused, but essentially over a period of 3 years, you're going to remove a third of the oldest, least colorful growth, if that makes sense, the least colorful stems. So each year over 3 years, prune out those thick, kind of brownish ones, do the same thing the next spring and then the next spring. And then at the end of 3 years, you'll have a smaller, more compact shrub with a lot better branch color.
Okay, good to know. All right, well, we can go on into winter then.
Okay.
Great.
We just got through winter, now we have to go back to it. So, all right, so these are plans for winter interest. This is a little bit of a shorter section because I figure at this point you're probably a little bit on plant overload and probably your wheels are churning, but these are just some options for winter. So the first thing, and these are not specific plants, I can tell you what these are, but really think about plants that have nice seed heads. And in this case, the one on the left is miscanthus. This is, I'm trying to remember, silver reed grass, I think is the common name, miscanthus. So those are the seed heads from miscanthus. And then our favorite little coneflowers are the ones on the right. And this is actually a photo I just captured this spring because I thought it was so cute that it had just caught little tufts of snow. But the nice thing about the seed heads is that not only do they provide winter interest, they also can provide food for the birds. And so obviously our feathered friends during the winter months, food is more scarce. And so providing some of these things will actually give them some good protein during the winter months. And so ornamental grasses fit that bill. There's also several perennials. Plus there's just some plants that have really cool texture during the winter months too. So think about that. You know, it's the decision whether or not you want to clean up your garden in the fall or wait to spring is really a personal choice. I would say that you can do some fall cleanup if you have the energy, if you have the time, you could absolutely do that. But if you want to wait till spring, it's okay too. The benefit of leaving some of your perennials standing during the fall is that they can actually capture more snow, which will help insulate the plant and then also provide a little bit more moisture to the crown of the plant as well. So it's really your call. There are some plants that you can leave standing in the fall, like your coneflower, like the ornamental grasses, but if you don't like them, then cut them down. That's totally fine. Also for winter interest, the tree fruit can be really appealing. So up here on the left, we have the hawthorn. So the fruit will, once it goes through a freeze, will turn a little bit mushy. It's not going to be great eats, obviously for you, but the birds will eat it. Oftentimes it would drop. There are some crab apples that will also retain their fruit into the winter months, which is nice. And there are some other plants that hold their berries as well. In the bottom left corner, we have Kentucky coffee tree. These are really thick, chunky pods. I think they provide so much interest in the winter months. They retain on the tree. They're huge. And then the actual structure of Kentucky coffee tree is a little bit more coarse. So it could serve as more of a Halloween tree because it has these really coarse branching structures. And then you add these pods and it provides some nice interest. In the top here, we have catalpa, also known as the cigar tree. That one might be familiar to you, but these big long pods, they have split open, releasing the seeds inside, but the pods itself will retain on the tree. Then they'll be shed in the spring. So tree fruit can be a real nice thing. In terms of twig color, going back to the red and the yellow twig dogwood, so red twig on the left, yellow twig on the right. Both of these will provide such neat color. The yellow twig is definitely not planted as much as the red twig. So you could plant both. I went to Iowa State. Our colors are red and gold, so you could have an Iowa State landscape. But just know, again, to keep this nice color, you do need to do some regular pruning. So removing a third of the oldest each spring prior to leaf out will help it keep the shrub young, more compact, and also a brighter color as well. The bark of trees and shrubs can also be interesting. So if you have oaks in the landscape, they're going to provide some nice interest. This is Japanese tree lilac. That's the one in the center. If you're familiar with birch, it kind of looks like river birch a little bit because it has that nice peeling, exfoliating bark. It also has these lenticels, which are these white flecks along the trunk. And so those are quite nice and also ornamental, kind of a cinnamon color. So against a white snow, that can really stand out. On the right is nine bark. Nine bark can get some exfoliation. I think some of these you just might need to appreciate at potentially a level where you just need to appreciate them because they're not as wow as flowers or fruit, but some of these are a little bit more subtle in the landscape, if you will. But one thing you can absolutely add to your landscape are evergreens. And of course, evergreens retain their foliage all year and they will have beautiful colors. So let's look at a couple of the evergreens before we wrap things up. The first is bristlecone pine. This is a Colorado native. It's hardy up to 11,000 feet. So holy moly, it can really go up in elevation. This is a 5-needle pine. And what that means is that pines grow in either pairs of 2, 3, or 5. And so if you were to take a bundle of these needles and count them, there would be 5 per bundle. Mugo pine has 2 needles. Austrian pine has 2 needles. And so if you're looking to identify some of our evergreens, looking at how many needles per bundle is a good way to start the identification process. So this is a very, very slow growing tree. And I would really caution against planting it in the lawn or near the lawn because it is so drought tolerant and again, native. And so when we give our lawns regular water, this is not going to be a happy camper. The next one is Eastern white pine. Oh, I will say, I need to go back one slide, sorry. The white flecks on the needles are just resin dots, okay? It's not an insect. Sometimes we get this into our office saying, oh, I think I have some sort of bug on my pine. That is just a very common identification feature for the bristlecone pine. So 100% normal. It's a great tree. I think you should consider planting it. The next one is Eastern white pine, and then its close cousin, the Southwestern white pine. And the Southwestern white pine is the one that's native to the Four Corners region of Colorado. These two species are pretty much identical, and I cannot tell them apart. So I've been told that the needles of one have some distinct feature, but only a horticulturalist or a botanist would really know what that is. So I'm embarrassed to say that I just kind of label them as a white pine, regardless if they're Eastern or Southwestern. It's another 5-needle pine, and this one has such beautiful, dainty foliage. It's very, very soft. It's very airy. And so when you walk by, you're just tempted to, grab it and just kind of just feel how soft that foliage is. It can grow up to 9,000 feet. In urban areas, it's not the happiest. It can actually suffer from some of our pollution that we can get, but sited properly, it can do really, really well. So consider that as a tree. The white fir is another Colorado native. This can be absolutely enormous, up to 125 feet tall. Now that probably wouldn't happen in our lifetime, but just know that it can be very large, so it does need to be planted properly and away from things. What I love about the white fir is it's so incredibly pyramidal. It's perfectly pyramidal. It is so symmetrical. And so for me, it's just absolutely ideal. You cut it down the middle and it's the same on both sides. The white fir, even though it's native, it does prefer a little bit more moist soil. The same thing goes for spruce. And so spruce is another native tree. And both of those really do prefer more moist soil. So I would say that these are not drought tolerant. And I know that's the focus of this talk. But because they're native, they are used to areas with potentially more snowfall because they tend to go up in higher elevation. So just know that if they're planted in the landscape, they can get by planted in a lawn or near a lawn, but they will need supplemental irrigation in the winter months and hardy up to 10,000 feet. The junipers, I think they get a bad reputation, but the junipers totally have a place in the landscape. They can either be trees or shrubs. And the nice thing about junipers is that there's so much variation in the foliage color, in the height, in the width, and these are so drought tolerant. Another native to the southwest part of Colorado, especially the Rocky Mountain juniper. And this is one where if you have struggled planting something and it's in full sun or even part shade, junipers will fit the bill. They come as ground cover shrubs, they come as trees, and so there's a lot of variation, and I think there's a juniper for every landscape. What I would say with the junipers is that They are often planted in areas where they start to grow over sidewalks or get in the way of traffic or even into the lawn, and then they get pruned and they look terrible. So junipers really need to be planted with the mature width in mind so that they aren't pruned. For the most part, evergreens should not be pruned. They just don't really tolerate it. And so make sure you're planting these evergreens accordingly so that they have enough width to grow. Woodward was a plant select introduction in 2015. This one gets to be about 15 to 20 feet tall, but very, very narrow. So this is a great one if you're looking to maybe plant it near a fence to help block a view. Woodward would be another great choice. Blue chip is just one of the many ground cover junipers that you could plant. And I like blue chip because it's such a nice blue color. So woodward is more of the true green color. Blue chip has more of the blue color. That's the nice thing about junipers is the diversity in the offerings that you could actually plant. So with that, that was a whirlwind of our 4 seasons with some color for each. And I will take any final questions that you have.
Right, awesome. Okay, let's see. So first one, why is it that junipers have a bad rep, bad reputation?
So it's because they're pruned and then they look bad. So I like to say that they're sometimes pruned to ugly. So when they're planted near a sidewalk and then someone comes by with like a hedge trimmer and just shears off that side, they just look so, it's like you're exposing the skeleton of the shrub and they just don't look good. But as their natural shape, they're great. I've heard some people aren't a huge fan because they collect trash, and they kind of do. They kind of gather things because they tend to blow. But really, I think junipers have a place. We just need to treat them appropriately. So it's our cultural practices that give junipers the bad name.
Got it. All right. So of the options you just went through, would you fertilize many of these?
I really wouldn't. I'm not a huge, I haven't read enough research publications where these plants need regular fertilizer. And so that's the thing, is that if they're sited properly, if they're given the proper cultural conditions, which is water and mulch and things like that, for the most part, these are not plants that need a lot of fertilizer. And the other thing is that I think sometimes fertilizer is used to try to fix a problem. And you really can't do that. You should never try to out-fertilize a problem. So for our natives, they love it lean. They love it, basically ignore me, leave me alone, let me do my thing. And a lot of our other Waterwise plants are the same way. They just don't need a lot of extra fertility.
Okay, great. Let's see, where is the best place to find the grape holly, the Mahonia?
The Oregon grape. So that's hard to say, but I would start first with like a local independent garden center. And now I would say would be the time to start shopping for some of these plants if it's been hard to find in the past. In the fall, the great thing is that nurseries will do several orders in the spring and they'll get fresh material in. So generally you can ask their purchaser, is something coming in, and you can get an idea of when to hit up the garden center.
Awesome. Let's see. How about you, shrubs?
So you are another evergreen, and they just really don't like it here. I haven't seen a yew that has been thriving. So they're a shrub kind of like our arborvitae that just prefer more moisture, more humidity. They tend to get brown in the winter, so they tend to brown out. And the other big issue I have with yew is that they're very, very toxic. So the entire plant is toxic. And so it's just one, unless you have a super microclimate shaded spot that has good moisture, I don't think you would make the top of my list.
Okay, good to know. What are some good choices for small evergreen shrubs for foundation plantings?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are junipers. I'll go back to junipers that can do really well. There's also mugo pine. So there's a lot of mugos that would do well. Some of the mugos, just know that even though I kind of name them a meatball shrub because they're so round, they can get very large. So we have some very large mugo pines. So make sure you're siting it appropriately. let's see, other evergreens that you could do. There is boxwood, and I would say that that's one that needs more of a protected spot because again, they can get some winter browning. So I would start there with either some of the pines or some of the junipers. You have a lot of options.
Great. Let's see. Does the bark of the Russian hawthorn shed or exfoliate? Sounds like this person has had some white coverings that are peeling off.
Yeah, it can do some of that. It can get a little bit, like it can form like plate-like that can actually shed. It shouldn't fall off in chunks, so there might be something else going on. You might want to contact your local extension office, send some pictures if you can with that, but it can get a little bit of a how do I want to describe it? Shaggy, like a shaggy bark.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I've got just a couple more if you've still got some.
Yeah.
All right. Do you typically fertilize bulbs? And I know you kind of just mentioned your perspective on fertilizer, but.
Yeah, so you could fertilize at planting, and then after that, I would say minimally as needed. But yes, you could add some sort of slow release or organic at planting. That would help. But just know that when our growers are producing bulbs, they are providing so much fertility. So those bulbs will have everything they need in order to bloom. But really, you could.
Okay.
If you must. If you feel it helps, then yes.
Okay. So can chicory be grown in zone 5?
Chicory.
You know, I don't think that's mentioned.
I have not seen it. I'm thinking it might be hardy enough so it could grow, but I'm wondering if it's a moisture humidity issue.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
And let's see, let's see. Is there a good ground cover that could replace grass that's close to ground?
Oh, so many. There are so many options. So yeah, if you're looking to remove turf, there is a multitude of ground covers, and that's where I would suggest the Plant Select Find a Plant tool. So if you go to that website, up on the top, it's plants, and then the drop-down menu, Find a Plant, just type in that you want a ground cover, and there are a plethora of options that you can consider.
Okay, great. And let's see, I'll just do one more here. Let's see, how do perennials do in a container or pot?
Yeah, so you could grow perennials in a container. I would recommend that you don't hold them for too many years. So maybe if you want to grow them for a season with the intent to plant them in the garden into the fall, that would be fine. If you do overwinter, we have a good publication on how you can do that. So generally, you can either sink the pot into the ground, which is good, or you're going to group them on the north side of the house so that it doesn't have the temperature fluctuations. But you want a container that's not going to crack in the winter. So like clay can crack, as we've all experienced. So it does become a little bit more involved, but you can, but I would say not as a perennial, not a perennial year after year.
Great. Well, in the matter of time, we'll go ahead and end here, but thank you so much. This was so informative and just awesome to see all these great pictures and hear everything about each plant. So I do want to remind everybody that the information right here, you can see Allison's email. You can also email turf removal, TURF removal at resourcecentral.org with any other lingering questions you have after the presentation. And the slides will also be available. We'll send those out afterwards. So yeah, thank you again, Allison. This was just absolutely fantastic.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Have a great one.